Leaders of the NATO alliance are discussing how to defeat a resurgent Taliban in Afghanistan. Let's just show you the latest live pictures to get a sense of what's going on there, if we can, for you. The summit in the French city of Strasbourg, there it's taking place, where the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, describes the Afghan conflict as a test case for all the alliance. Security very tight on the streets there of Strasbourg. The French police again using tear gas against protesters. At the summit itself, leaders have so far failed to agree on one key aspect of their discussions. That's the name of the new Secretary General, due to happen by the end of July. Our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue is there, explaining for us what the leaders have been discussing.
Afghanistan clearly is top of the agenda. The discussion, if you like, the urging by Barack Obama for the Europeans to send more troops and more people to help on the ground in terms of training. That is clearly the most important issue being discussed here today. And we already know that the British government has indicated it's prepared to increase temporarily the number of troops in the country, particularly in the run-up to the elections in Afghanistan in August. But there's a lot of pressure on the other European members of NATO to step up to the plate, as one official put it to us yesterday. They'll also, of course, be talking about Russia too. This idea that the Americans want to reset the relationship with Russia, press the reset button. Also, of course, this question of nuclear proliferation. We're expecting a big nuclear proliferation conference next year, aren't we? And Barack Obama already suggesting he wants to see a nuclear-free world. And, of course, still that kind of thorny housekeeping issue of the new Secretary General, over which there is still no agreement.
The French president sitting beside Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor there, Monsieur Sarkozy, explaining as well why the NATO alliance remains important 60 years after its formation.
It's a symbol to be able to welcome you here, because NATO is an organization for peace. It's not a war organization, it's a peace organization. And the fact that it's Germany and France hosting together you here shows this determination to achieve peace. The understandings, the friendship between France and Germany is not just a choice, it's a duty.
Kabul, we'll talk to our correspondent there, Martin Patience. Martin, a lot of focus being given over to this new legislation that the President Karzai has signed into existence. To what extent is that an own goal, an embarrassing own goal for him?
Well, certainly this new legislation was in effect human rights, women's human rights. Basically what it meant was women, it's applicable to the Shia minority, or 10% of this country. It said, this new legislation stated that the Shia men would be allowed to have sex with their wife at least once every 4 days, and those women would also have to seek permission to leave their houses. Now, obviously, there's been a storm of criticism over this legislation, most notably by the NATO Secretary General, Jaap de Hoop Scheffer, who said, why are we fighting, why are we sending our soldiers to fight and die in Afghanistan when human rights are not being upheld by the Afghan government? So real anger over this issue, although just a few hours ago President Karzai said that this issue would be reviewed, that the legislation would be passed back to the Ministry of Justice, and we're expecting an announcement again on this issue sometime tomorrow.
Is it your sense that they're actually going to jettison this legislation, despite the fact, Martin, that some cynics were saying this was actually about votes that President Karzai needs to garner in the run-up to the delayed elections taking place in August?
Well, there's nothing concrete in Afghanistan, but what we are hearing, that there is a possibility that this new legislation will be annulled. As I said before, we're expecting an announcement from the Ministry of Justice sometime tomorrow. But as you pointed out, many critics see this as blatant electioneering. Obviously, the Shias, they're about 10% of the population here. They're a key minority. And certainly President Karzai might be trying to win some favour with conservative Shia clerics, who are obviously very influential in their communities and who might be able to deliver some votes for President Karzai ahead of the presidential election in August.
Martin Patience live in Kabul. Martin, thanks very much. Let's take you back to our live feed of pictures. The latest trouble going on the streets of Strasbourg, mirroring the kind of trouble that we saw during the G20 in London during the middle and the end of last week. The troublemakers there on the ground in Strasbourg. The French police, the German police using tear gas, where London's Metropolitan Police, that was the line in the sand for the Met in London. They decided last week not to use tear gas. We'll stay with the live pictures. We'll talk to our correspondent, Clive Myrie. Clive, where are you and what's going on?
Well, I'm just about to start walking with thousands of demonstrators, the vast majority peaceful, it has to be said, but some a lot less so, through the streets in Strasbourg in a huge march against NATO. Now, high above me, police helicopters are hovering, and along the march route, there are thousands of French riot police blocked the side roads, keeping the demonstrators to the main road. Things have calmed down a little bit now, but for most of the morning, we've been watching pitched battles between a hardcore of protesters and the riot police. Numerous rounds of tear gas have been fired and baton rounds as well, as you've mentioned, while demonstrators have been responding with bricks and stones and Molotov cocktails. And as I speak to you now, I'm watching a group of black-clad demonstrators completely destroy a bus station, a disused bus station. And to my left here, a number of demonstrators have actually dug up parts of the road, the pavement here, digging up bricks and other missiles that they can throw against the riot police along the march route.
I think it's more by coincidence than by design, Clive. I think we're watching live pictures of where you are. Just stay with us, Clive, because for the sake of our viewers, what happens in a situation like this, so you know exactly how we're getting these pictures. The local broadcaster films them, puts them on a satellite, they open switches, we open switches. That way we're able to patch into whatever it is they're filming. We're talking to Clive Myrie, our correspondent there. Clive, it reminds one of what happened to the RBS building in the Square Mile on Thursday here in London. But you were saying at the beginning of your first answer that the march is actually going to take place. So they're going to allow the demonstrators to at least move around the city, unlike London during the G20, where the police took the very conscious decision to corral the demonstrators and keep them in very small, specific areas.
Yes, that's right. A very different approach from the situation in London here. The organisers of this march, the Stop NATO Alliance, they call themselves. It's an umbrella organisation covering a number of disparate groups. They talks with the French authorities and indeed the German authorities as well, planning out their route for weeks now, and it has been agreed that the march should be allowed to go ahead. It will probably take around about 3 or 4 hours through parts of Strasbourg, but well away from where the NATO ministers and leaders are actually meeting. As I say, the demonstrators here are from a number of disparate groups. There are anarchists, there are communists, there are pacifists, there are members of the World Peace Council actually here also as well. But at the same time, there are a hardcore of demonstrators here that you probably see at demonstrations and marches like this all over the world. Seem to be gathering various projectiles to see what they can do in terms of dealing with the police.
We can see the hardcore, we can see their handiwork taking place as you're talking to us, Clive. Is it the same disparate makeup of protesters that we saw in London during the week, Clive, in as much as, and this was perhaps what scared the authorities, as well as the hardcore, as well as the troublemakers that one always sees at the G7, at the G8, now at the G20, there were nice, well-educated, middle-class people saying that the world had to do something. Is there a component in the demonstrators that you're with right now who are nice, they are white, they are middle class, they've got money in the bank, but they just want to get out and say something?
Absolutely. There's no question that I would say the vast majority of the people taking part in this march are peaceful. They are people who claim that NATO is simply a killing machine, and point to civilian deaths, the civilian toll in Afghanistan, for instance. We've seen a cross-section of society here. We've seen black and white, young and old. The vast majority, as I say, out here campaigning against an organisation that they believe has done nothing but bring destruction to the world over the last 60 years.
Clive Myrie there, right in the middle of that protest in Strasbourg. Clive, thanks very much. Clive will keep us right up to date with what's going on there, particularly when the marchers either decide to start moving or they are allowed to start moving. Clive making the point there that they are being allowed by the local police to start their march. At the risk of stating the completely obvious, they will be allowed no place near the various NATO leaders, presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers gathering at the summit venue for their discussions about the future direction of NATO. We'll talk now to our correspondent, our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams, who's following the twists and turns for us inside the summit venue itself. I mean, they couldn't be any more clear here, could they, Paul? What they're talking about is Afghanistan in terms of Afghanistan being NATO's most ambitious project ever.